Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, one in a series of virtual sessions that the Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy is hosting as part of the 7th Annual Columbia Global Energy Summit, and the first, and we hope the only, virtual Columbia Global Energy Summit. My name is Cheryl LaFleur. I'm a distinguished visiting fellow here at the center. I'm also a recovering regulator who previously served on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. Today's topic is a big one: North American electric power and industry in transition. We're going to start with the moderated discussion, and then we'll move to audience questions. For those of you joining us via Zoom, you can submit a question for the panelists at any time by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. This event is being broadcast live and will also be available online in the coming days. We have three terrific CEOs from the three North American countries to discuss the status of, to discuss the status of the energy industry in North America. Sophie Brochu is the president and CEO of Hydro-Quebec. As we all know, Hydro-Quebec operates a vast network of 60 hydroelectric facilities and 34,000 kilometers of high voltage power lines, among other things, to deliver power to customers in Canada and the United States. Also with us is Paula Gold-Williams, the president and CEO of CPS Energy in San Antonio, Texas. CPS is the largest combined gas and electric municipal utility in the United States, and Paula is a long-standing business leader in her community and nationally. And finally, we have Tanya Ortiz-Mena, the Chief Executive Officer of IEnova, which develops, builds, and operates gas and electric infrastructure in Mexico. A subsidiary of Sempra, IEnova is one of the largest private companies in Mexico. Welcome, Sophie, Paula, and Tanya. I know that all of you are navigating change in the energy landscape in your respective businesses and countries. Of course, the biggest driver of change today is the effort to adapt the world's energy industry to climate change, which has led to efforts to reduce the greenhouse gas impact of both energy production and energy consumption. But at the same time, as we're focused on improving our climate impact, companies have to continue to consider the cost of service to customers and the reliability and security of their networks and their service. So I'm just interested, as an opening question, if each of you could speak a little bit about the efforts in your part of the world, in your company, to decarbonize energy, and what issues you're facing and how you're working on those issues right now. And so for this one, we'll start in alphabetical order: Sophie, Paula, and then Tanya. So turning it over to Sophie.
Good afternoon to all of you. I am honored to be with my fellow partners on the panel. Great to be with all of you. Great team. Thank you for inviting me. As I try to summarize the task, we definitely have the responsibility to decarbonize our economy. For some, we need to start by decarbonizing the electricity itself. For others, like us in Quebec, we're already 99%, 98% decarbonized, so green and renewable. So we need to, in the noble sense of the way, attack another stretch of decarbonization, which is actually the end use of the electricity itself. The responsibility we have, all of us on the planet, is to start from our respective starting point and advance. We need to decarbonize, but the responsibility comes twofold, with reducing the emissions, but also, and as importantly, to make it the least costly possible. People have other things to do than to pay a power bill. They need to go to school, they need to pay for health, they need to pay for their workers, education, and all that. So we need to do it at the least cost possible. I am a believer that there will be cost associated to the transition. Costs that will be front-loaded compared to the back end of the benefits that come with it. So we need to be intelligent, empathetic to the people, because there will be people who will lose their job because of the transition. So I believe that we need to not only talk about the use of electricity and building the infrastructures, but how are we going to help people transit, not to another job, because you cannot ask a 50 years old rigger to install solar panel, but how are we going to help them transition their economic life? Because if we do not, these people will oppose. They're human beings. This is how they put bread on the table. So we need to take care of them, because if we leave it to the private companies who hire them, nothing will happen. People will fight against the noble goal of transition. So that would be my take. So we produce and transport and distribute our electricity everywhere in Quebec. We are happy to contribute to the goals and the ambitions of our fellow citizens in Canada. Same south of the border with the US Northeast and New York particularly. So we're there to be a complement to their respective territories' ambition with their own development of renewable energy sources. And because of the reservoir that we have, we can act as a battery. That's the long story short.
Thank you very much. Turning it over to Paula.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And thanks for helping me to connect to today's event. I believe that I am with a group of esteemed colleagues here, and this is an important time in our evolution. I basically believe the industry has been in an evolution for probably 20 years, but I think more now than ever, all of us are real believers that the momentum of our evolution is very, very rapid. So I also believe, and thank you so much for the seminar here, and the approach internationally and looking at a continent with 3 different perspectives. And I also believe in the concept of regionality. It really depends, each journey, each community has a journey that somewhat depends on where your customers are, but it also depends on what your history has been, what's common in your region, and how can you make those decarbonization decisions going forward. I'm in Texas. I'm in South Texas, matter of fact. So very hot state. We don't have the benefit here of hydropower, which we would love. It's just not as common. We have also served, CPS Energy is in the 7th largest city in the United States, San Antonio, Texas, and we've served this community for 161 years. So when we started, we were completely carbon-based. We were a gas lamp company, we were a gas generation company, a distribution company. Over time, what we figured out is we needed to be diversified, and we needed to make sure that we were listening and had our ear to the ground on what innovations were coming and what technologies were going to happen. Now, I will say for over 20 years, we've been into renewables. We have wind and solar. We have a huge energy efficiency and conservation plan. And it's done very, very well in helping us introduce, as Sophie says, to customers, what's in it for them? How can they participate? How can you create incentives for them to be part of the decarbonization journey and have it, be interesting to them? We just had a seminar recently, a town hall, and I had a customer ask me, why do I care? And again, customers, have so many other things to worry about. Energy makes sure they can actually get everything done, but usually it is an unconscious decision to consume energy. And so I think what we do have is this opportunity to engage our customers more and tell them the why, and create things that are interesting and makes them want to know more. The biggest thing we did recently is we put out 2 global RFPs. One was for true energy generation, and it's called the Flex Power Bundle. And instead of us solely going after solar or solely going after new technology, we bundled that. And we went up to 900 more megawatts of solar, which would be big for Texas. We want to have a component, not that much right now, of just batteries, about up to 50 megawatts and up to 500 megawatts of firming capacity. And I think the firming capacity piece is the most interesting, because that's where we want to see new innovation. The biggest key is duration. We need long-term duration. we're going to talk about this some more, but the one thing that Yuri taught us is duration really matters. Velocity and duration together is what we have to do and focus on. So we did that RFP, and then we did one on energy efficiency and conservation. We wanted to look across the globe for the best practices ready to go, and maybe some of them that may be early that we can pilot. So those are the ways that we're looking at trying to create the enthusiasm, partner with our owner, the city of San Antonio, and really, again, gin up more discussion about how each person can participate.
Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you. And I mean, it's wonderful to be sitting here virtually with such a talented group of women. So thank you, Cheryl, for inviting me. Let me discuss energy transition from a Mexican perspective, from Mexico perspective. And Mexico is in a very unique position today because, I mean, first, I mean, we have, and a lot of people are not aware, but the Mexican economy is the 15th largest economy in the world. We have the 10th largest population in the world, and we have a manufacturing and exporting economy. Mexico has more free trade agreements than any other country in the world. It has access, of course, to the US and Canada market, but also to the Gulf Coast and the Pacific Coast. So 90% of Mexican exports are manufactured goods. And so that means, and going back to Sophie's comment, which I believe was very, very relevant, how do we create jobs? How do we create good quality jobs so that people can have an appropriate, a decent standard of living? And in Mexico, the key is in the manufacturing sector. And that manufacturing sector requires clean, reliable, and affordable energy supply. So going back to Sophie's comment, how is Mexico transitioning to a clean, reliable, and affordable energy supply? We're a few steps behind, or many steps behind, the United States and Canada, but we're in a good position. First, because today we can take advantage of the US abundant and low-cost natural gas. And in Mexico, that means transitioning power generation from fuel oil to natural gas. It means transitioning households from propane to natural gas. It means transitioning industries from diesel to natural gas. So that first step is taking place today as we're building very large pipelines essentially from Texas into Mexico. But Mexico is also very, very rich in renewable resources. So Mexico has a very unique wind resources, solar resources, and hydro resources that we can develop at very competitive costs. So for Mexico, energy transition is I wouldn't call it a challenge, it's a wonderful opportunity.
Well, thank you. God, there's so many directions we can go. I guess I want to next ask Sophie and Tanya to talk about, you both manage businesses that are at least partly focused on energy exports, because of course, Quebec, a lot of the effort has been in the exporting of hydropower south. And I know, Tanya, you've been involved in a major project to export LNG from Costa Azul. And so how do you think about the global energy market right now and the export or import? And Paula, if you have happy to have your opinion too, the global market, where do you see those export or import opportunities going?
Well, thank you for the question. I think we are at a turning point right now. We are at a point where exports used to be commercially driven, where now I believe that the exports need to be seen as the optimal way of transiting energy. So what is export? An export is, I go from country A to country B, but tomorrow, what we will need to do is to go from A to B to B to A to A to B to B to A. So to me, it's about moving the energy around at the right time of the day, at the right time of the year, and putting all hands on deck. So we've seen Hydro-Québec for a long, long time, which is the case. We've been selling energy to the US Northeast and to New York. Tomorrow, the way we view our contribution is to, yes, sell clean, competitive, reliable, very reliable energy to New York, for example, but also to help the territories to develop their own wind and solar energy, which are intermittent, that we can back up with our reservoir. So it means that in the near future, New York will sell electricity to Quebec, and the New England market will sell electricity to Quebec, and we will move that energy around. And the necessity to do that is precisely because we cannot afford piling up infrastructure saying, well, my business model will serve that to the customer. We need to start from the customer and ripple back to the producing part of the food chain. Only if we do that, we will be able to put the customer at the center. So the export used to be a commercial opportunities. Export used to be building infrastructures, which are required, but export today also require, I believe, the right mental posture.
And I could not agree more with Sophie. We need to understand energy as a global system, not from a company perspective, not from a country perspective. And I think very much of energy from a regional perspective. In North America, as a region, we talk about regional integration, but we very rarely talk about energy integration in the region. And we need to understand, for example, develop Mexico solar resources and export solar energy into the southern US. So we need to understand what's the most efficient to develop our energy system. And let me give you a few examples. We developed the first ever cross-border wind generation facility right across the border from California, and we're sending wind power into California that's being produced in Mexico. Another example is LNG facilities. We're building liquefaction facility in the west coast of Mexico that will allow producers in Texas to bring their gas via pipeline into the west coast of Mexico, where we will liquefy it and take it to Asian markets, which are, again, converting from coal and fuel to natural gas. So I agree with Sophie. Let's focus on the end use of energy and the most efficient way of developing our systems.
Thank you. Paula, did you want to?
Just gonna add a little bit. I mean, I don't have the perspectives that Sophie and Tanya have, but because Texas, of course, the controversy for us is our natural gas and oil business is exported, and I think that's really important. I really believe that the ability for countries to exchange energy really matters. On the electric side, we're like an island. Texas is an island, and it's controversial, and it caused, I think, some challenges in terms of our inability to push power back and forth between all across the nation. And so that's a big controversial point. But ultimately, I do agree that we have to think more about integration and get past some of the very complex issues around policy and maybe the issue about who captures what market and what the opportunities are to make sure that our customers have the best. As said earlier, I think we have to get rid of those barriers as much as possible.
Thank you. We have a question from the audience. That was a question that I had also, which is about building infrastructure to meet all these needs, to meet your own customer needs, as well as to participate in larger markets. And what challenges do you, I mean, I could talk about this all day, but how do you find it on the ground, trying to get the plants and wires built that you need to make these transitions? Anyone can start.
Well, I can certainly, if I may, because we are right now in the midst of, we've permitted a very major project, which is one of the biggest decarbonization project in North America right now, which involves selling renewable power to Massachusetts and building a line, transmission line through Maine to get there. Linear projects, complicated, but the project went through all the permitting process and is fine. And this is where I think we need to take a pause and say, who are disadvantaged by this project? And those who are disadvantaged are the power facilities who produce electricity with something else than green. There are companies who are working hard to make their business model evolve. There are other companies who are trying to sting to a business model that is completely threatened by the energy transition. If we leave to the management of the plant owners who produce electricity, who has a business model, a destiny that derives like an iceberg to the South Seas, the company will fight against the transition. We cannot afford to have companies fighting the policy of a government and a region. So we need to take care of the people who are working into this fossil fuel driven production. We need to talk to them and say, we're going to take care of you. Do not fight the transition, you will be safe. And this is very important because when we talk about transition, we talk about technology, we talk about the cost, we talk about the infrastructure, but we don't talk enough about the human beings. And if we can take care of the human beings, and there are quite a few, but it's limited compared to the benefit. If we can take care of the human beings whose job are threatened by the transition and say, here is the package for you. If we could find that, then it would smooth the construction of facilities. So to me, one of the big challenges that we have right now is that we are of the mouvance of the 70s and let the market decide. The market cannot decide. The market will not decide. It's got to be policy driven, market supported, but the policy cannot be the summation of corporate policies. You have the policy of the region and then ask the market to say, how do you serve this policy? Not the contrary around. And for the last decades, we had sufficient transmission capacity. And all of a sudden, and nobody built capacity. All of a sudden, we need new capacity. And everybody looks at one another, who's going to do that? So policy first, market contribution after, not the other way around, my humble belief.
Well, I agree with you, Sophie, but I think that there's such a disaggregation of the authority to make the policy among the different states in the United States, as well as there's not a macro plan for the employees who might be displaced that is coming from the same place. So we're functioning in a very, in sometimes disaggregated policy environment. Tanya, did you want to chime next or?
Yes, thank you, Cheryl. It's becoming more and more difficult to develop energy infrastructure, especially linear infrastructure, where you're going through hundreds of miles, and that means going through different communities, different type of environments. And I think energy companies took maybe a little bit too long to react to these challenges as communities found their own voice, as environmental organizations started to speak against these projects. Because the fact is that energy infrastructure, even the cleanest energy infrastructure, has an environmental impact and has a social impact. And as organizations, we need to acknowledge that, and we need to address that, and we need to address that very directly. And that means essentially compensating and mitigating, really compensating and mitigating long-term the impact that is happening as we develop that infrastructure. So I think, again, energy companies have a very serious responsibility in order to survive. I mean, it's new to our business, but we need to acknowledge that in order to survive. And that means really creating partnerships with the communities. Let me give you an example. I spoke about that wind farm in Baja California. I remember when we were going to rent the land, a very, very large portion of land, I went to a community meeting, and it was full of men only, maybe 100 of them wearing hats and boots. It was a rural community, and I was very worried about what the reaction of the community would be, right? And when we went through the project and explained that we would be paying rent, creating jobs, that we would bring security to the area, that we had scholarship programs, et cetera, they said, well, how soon can you get started, right? And we've built a link with the community to the extent that when one of the windmills is not running, we get a call from the community saying, hey, that park is not operating. I need you to do better, right? So you need to create a partnership, but also very importantly, going back to Sophie's comments, we need to be aligned, or we need public policy to determine a country's infrastructure needs. And based on that, all rules and regulations need to be aligned in order to enable that infrastructure to be developed.
Thank you, Paula. I know you're right there on the ground with the relationships with the community that Tanya's talking about.
Well, very much so. We are. I mean, I think everything does go back to, again, to the customer's interest. Being the seventh largest city, though, for years we've been talking about the continuum of thought and the continuum of preferences to solve these problems. And I was looking in the chat a bit. Again, one thing we learned: there's no real villain. There's no technology to absolutely skip, in my opinion, to get to decarbonization. Yes, I know all the merits of solar and wind, and I saw one of the questions about how do you do that without batteries. I don't think you can do an effective supplying power to any community without it being fulsome, and thinking about that storage component. But I will tell you, the one thing that we learned in Texas in February was our winter peak has now grown to be more impactful than our summer peak. We've never had a winter peak as large and as intense as this time, as what we've normally seen in the summer, but it surpassed that in every single way. As much as in Texas, again, what we do is we're constantly trying to take heat off of plants. And we are constrained by the types of plants that function well in our hot conditions. Ultimately, you're not going to expect wind and solar to be your primary producers in winter. You can, and you definitely can't do it with storage. And then you have policy and protocol issues, meaning once you take the charge and you've used those batteries up completely, when you're really starving to produce power, you're not going to recharge the batteries. You probably can't from the solar system because of the bad weather. And even if you could, the one thing you're going to do is push that power directly to a home. So I still believe that this evolution has many, many parts. It does require continued investment in infrastructure along the way, but trying to skip steps and say, well, you don't need to put more investment in new technologies. I mean, that's definitely the wrong answer. We need to put more technology, more investment in extending the duration on storage. And we definitely need to, I don't think we're going to get to a lot more efficient wind and solar just because they become commodities. And one other question you had out there was, are we finding that it's cheaper? Yes, solar is very, very cheap. In terms of the power produced and that cost. It's the intermittency is a problem. I still believe that what we talked about earlier, it still requires companies, communities, governments, and customers to think collectively about what's the best way to prioritize our approach to decarbonization, using the technologies in the right way to make that journey. We're going to have 10 more winters between now and the time we get to 2030. We won't again be able to skip that. We're going to have to collaborate and figure out how can policy at the highest levels of government down to the state and locally inform the best way to keep reliability and resilient systems while we're trying to keep the environment safe and really decarbonize along the way. It is no simple linear task. It's kind of the all of the above approach.
Well, we obviously do have to focus on keeping the lights on in the present and the gas flowing while we get to the future. And we can't protect everything against everything. So we have had some questions from the audience on Storm Uri, which of course, if anyone doesn't know it by name, was the freezing weather that Texas experienced in February that caused quite prominent and human devastating outages. And we have a specific question on whether connecting Texas to the rest of the United States would help, but I guess I'd like to broaden it a little. You know, you're right in the middle of that, Paula. What lessons have you learned? Because we're all facing how to make the systems more resilient against weather, cybersecurity, and other risks that are faced. And then I will turn to Sophie and Tanya, who I know also experience severe weather and high cyber threats and so forth. That's not limited to the ERCOT interconnection. Starting with you, Paula, because I'm sure these questions probably follow you wherever you go. Oh, it's the lady from the electric company. Let's talk about February.
Yeah, Cheryl, thanks so much. You know, the list of things that we learned are long and painful. Clearly, we have a case where people didn't academically suffer. It wasn't an issue of ideology. It was a real physical awakening about the fragility of, you know, systems and structures, and how when you really don't stress test them or think about the unintended consequence, what the ramifications could be. I think locally, what we learned is communication needs to be at the forefront of where we're putting our investments. We believe that we need a much more robust state communication system that makes sure that our system operator is sharing information that we can really flip around very, very quickly to customers. I do think that psychologically, most customers don't want to hear when the system's stressed. I mean, after the storm, a lot of customers believed that we weren't really going to go, you know, black, and that the blackout was kind of made up. When we started talking to customers about how frequently, particularly in Texas, because we haven't had huge investments in baseload generation, how tough that is in the summer when we, you know, basically all utilities are on a screwdriver alert. That means, you know, you're poised and ready to do any quick repair because the system is getting stressed and stressed and stressed. The demand is growing. Texas is a growing state. San Antonio is a growing city. So demand is consciously disconnected to what supply looks like. And so we need to not just think about taking the grid and making it a lot more resilient and robust, and an ability to create better microgridding and islanding certain critical infrastructures. We basically in Texas are managing outages through circuits that's not robust enough. And again, how do you connect that to tell customers to prepare, to be ready, to make sure that they understand this storm is going to last more than a day. And in some cases, some of our customers suffered for 5 days in terms of not having energy. And there were all these implications to water and to communications. And so the list that we are thinking about, what can we do in San Antonio? We are advocating in Austin, which is our capital, constantly about everything from design, what needs to be done differently in design, how we need to do communication systems, make them real, take them all the way to elementary schools about energy and conservation. Conservation was critical to the ability for Texas to restabilize, and changing that whole event from I don't want to know to please tell me, and why, again, is it important to them. And the last thing I'll say about this is we are in Texas, we're an energy only market. And the great thing about an energy only market is it always points to the lowest common delivery point and cost of power, which, you know, for decades and decades has worked to our advantage. But it doesn't, as we talked about earlier, it doesn't send signals that are preventative, that get in front of growth, that think about reliability. And then what it does do is, as it's pushing prices down most of the year, it grabs scarcity pricing. And so it's looking for stress system, situations all the time. And it says, oh, a stress situation, take your prices to the cap. And that's how that's what they'll tell you. That's how we incent people to make investments in infrastructure. The flaw is the system can only handle so much of that scarcity pricing. And a day of scarcity pricing, hours of scarcity pricing throughout the year, not a problem. And it probably does send some pretty good signals. 5 days of scarcity pricing sent the absolute wrong signal in the middle of a declared disaster, because we have to, again, go full circle and think about the customers on the end of those bills. They like it when it's happening all year long, but when people say, now's the time for us to charge whatever we want in terms of a scarcity situation, and for as long as we need to, that is where we realize that the whole design was broken. We need to move away from a complete energy only market to something that looks for the merits of capacity and the merits of energy only when there isn't stress on the system. I mean, you can come and spend the day with me. I mean, there's just so many things that we're exploring, trying to talk to elected officials, regulators, companies, trying to negotiate a better future for Texas, because under this current situation, we would just repeat the same error again if we don't make some of these very, very big changes in our systems and our policies and the way that we approach how to get in front of the needs of energy demands in Texas.
You can build in resilience to the market, or try to, which means complicated market changes probably, or you can make standards or requirements for people to do certain things. But I know your legislature, what do you call it, ended the session without doing that, adjourned without doing that. And it's unclear what's going to happen at the national level. If there's a NERC standard out right now, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which we're all under, that would require winterization, at least in some situations. It's easy to talk about the lessons. It seems like it's going to take a long time for policymakers to actually apply them. So the North American Electric Reliability Corporation and all the resilience and cyber rules extend up to Canada too. And I want to turn next to Sophie for her perspective on these resilience and security issues.
Well, first I want to say I could not agree more, Cheryl, with what you just said about the standards and all that. I mean, there is no miracle. Without them, things won't happen. They just won't, because it has to flow through a P&L to a bottom line. No incentive there. Again, let the market decide is not a policy. I come back to resilience, cybersecurity. How do we embrace that? I think we need to be super, super humble. Bad things will happen. They will. So we need to invest a lot of money to secure our cyber attack resiliency, but we need to get prepared because it will happen. So how many times per year should we practice tabletops, real life occurrences of cyber attack? And then it can occur on the system, on the TNO, on the IT system, on the private data system. It will happen. It's not a matter of letting go our responsibility, exactly the opposite, but we need to be humble. The same as we plan the resiliency of our operations with an issue. Autarky is not a luxury that we can pay for. So we need to share. We need to be as independent as possible, but we cannot say that we can do everything by ourselves. We need to be connected. We need to have those support agreements. We need to have those standards to know that behind the wall, my neighbor will be there if I need, and I will be there for my neighbor if he or she needs. And only if we have this approach of collaboration, of putting our infrastructures in common for the better good of the citizens that we are serving, only then do we know that we make the resiliency at the best cost possible. So I think we need to be pragmatic, ambitious, and humble.
That's a tall order. Thank you, Tanya.
But I mean, let me address first the storms in Texas, because as I just mentioned, I mean, Mexico relies on natural gas imported from Texas for its gas supply. About 70%, 70% of Mexico's natural gas consumption is imported from the US. So we did have blackouts at the same time, or as a result of the storm in Texas. It was not as severe as the situation in Texas, but we were impacted. And lessons learned, first, diversification is key. And I think, I mean, diversification is key to resiliency. You need to have diverse sources of energy production, diverse sources of energy supply. And in order to achieve that, we need to strengthen our transmission systems. The future is electric. So we may not want to build any more gas pipelines, oil pipelines, that's fine. But we do need to build more transmission lines. That provides resiliency to a system, particularly as we think about building renewables that it's a fact of nature, you can only produce where that natural resource exists. So investing in transmission, Mexico has underinvested in transmission for many, many years. And third, we need to think about storage. Most basic form or immediately accessible form of storage is natural gas storage. Mexico does not have any underground natural gas storage. So I think that's critical to providing reliable energy supply. But second, of course, power storage, which is just around the corner. In California, SIPA is already developing some large-scale battery projects. So I think diversification, storage, and transmission are the key to resiliency.
Thank you. I want to switch gears a little bit because I have a rare opportunity, I think a first for me, to moderate a panel of 3 leading female CEOs. And it's wonderful to see more female CEOs in the energy industry, but obviously it's still a small minority of the whole leadership population. And of course, gender diversity. So I guess I want to ask a double question. First, just focusing on gender diversity, what changes you've seen over the course of your career, you know, anything you want to share about what you think we should be doing differently in the future, but focusing more broadly, there's been so much focus, appropriate focus on increasing diversity, inclusion, and racial and other forms of equity. And what can the corporate community, what can you do in your company and in your communities on those issues? So, you know, your own experiences, but then as a leader, how you think about diversity, inclusion, equity for the company you lead. And whoever wants to start. I see Sophie unmuted herself, so Sophie.
I'll take that. I'm very vested into it. First, if we don't crack the gender equality, we will not crack the other diversity. So it's proven across the world. If you don't crack gender, you don't get to the others. So doesn't mean that we need to get to 50 before we start doing other works, but we need to get there. What I have seen and what I believe is a place where men can make a big difference. It might be a French-English translation. The word inclusion for me is hurting. Inclusion is like making charity to somebody. Say, I will include you, for you, I will include you. No, to me, it's not the mental posture. To me, it's diversity. And people need, everybody, men and women, need to understand that the more diverse you are, the more representative you are, the more resilient will be your business decision, the more perennity contribution you will have. Yesterday, we needed men to mentor women, and they did. They did it a little differently than they did with men, but they did. Now what we need are sponsors. A mentor talks to a woman. A sponsor talks about a woman to other people. And what has made my difference in my career is that a couple of times, strong men said to the others, when you speak to Brochu, it says, if you were speaking to me, she is really good. We need men to actually voice the fact that he finds this woman formidable. They do that often with guys, And for whatever reason, not enough with women. So keep mentoring, start sponsoring. Thank you.
Thank you. That's something I'll definitely think, that's something that I'll add to my vocabulary after this panel is over. Thank you. I want to go to Paula next because I know Paula has to pop off this call a couple minutes early, and I want to be sure to hear from her because I know you've been very active on these issues nationally as well as, I'm sure, in your own community. Paula?
Again, thank you so much. And thanks for the topic. I seems like I talk all the time about Storm Uri, so I don't talk about people development as much as I used to. However, it is absolutely critical to, I think, to what we're doing today and to our industry's future, to our globe's future, really, about getting women more involved in technical careers, and particularly in the fields of energy. For us, I'm kind of a unicorn myself. I mean, I'm not an engineer. I am an accountant running a engineering, analytics, and operations company through a filter of people first. And our perspective is that if I can do it, I want every person, let alone every woman, to think about their ability to be in the industry that is changing. And I think that's the thing that's most exciting about this industry. It does heavily think about what the history is in the industry and what the technical skills are. But I think what it really speaks to is this adaptability, the resilience not only of the industry, but of people, and of this encouraging them constantly to expand their knowledge, to explore, to be open, to think creatively all the way around. And I used to think and can be concerned myself with that gap I had on the technology side. But most questions and most issues, I think, will be best handled by a comprehensive group of skills and abilities. Yes, you need to have people who are highly technical, know the industry, know the physics of what it takes to provide energy, but you also need people who can have that thirst, feed that thirst, but then also have the depth and ability to think about it in terms of the policy issues that you're trying to do about the changing people's jobs. You know, we talk about earlier recruiting people to the industry and taking industries and showing how their jobs will change. We even have in the industry a huge trying to convert existing talents within this industry so you could go back and forth fluidly from in that transition. It's not a greenfield site. This industry is a brownfield site. And so we're having to figure out how do we get people again to embrace change head on. And when you have that, I think that's a really fair ground for women to jump in at any point in their career and make a difference and be part of this, feeling brave enough to speak up, brave enough to not be perfect. Nobody's perfect, right? That's a ridiculous notion. Maybe you strive for it, but you don't assume that you're perfect in this industry. And ultimately embrace the ability to be included, to speak up. And these things, I know we've been talking to women about this forever, but I still see a lot of this. I'm not quite sure I fit the bill. I'm not sure I have the right background. I'm not sure people want to really hear what I have to say. Of course they do. And said thoughtfully and interjected at the time of conversation and not, 2 days later when the conversation's over. That's what we need in this industry, are people who are going to lean in and be active participants. So we ended up ending up with a very diverse senior leadership team, which I actually kind of keep evolving. I'm trying to bring people in more and more, and I'm really pleased that we're having an increasing number of women come in at every rank, but I definitely feel like we have a whole lot more work to do, and that does require everyone, men and women, getting to know your team members and encouraging them to take on new responsibilities and encouraging them to think about their development and their careers. And even when people kind of shy away from that discussion, leaders have to, I think, spend 50% of their time developing talent. That's just what we need to do to make sure that we have a chance at getting to the great goals of decarbonization, policy changes, innovation and technology. So I get really passionate about it, but I believe that we got a lot more work to do in terms of getting everybody at the table for all the great things that we have in front of us.
Well, I think you make a great point that so often I hear people say, well, I'd like to have more diversity, whether it's racial diversity or gender, but I can't find the right people because I need just this narrow definition of what I need. And there's no people that look like that in that little narrow circle. But if they thought more broadly about the skills and the professional backgrounds that people bring to the table, they might build a stronger team. Get out of their own head maybe, but I just hear those same comments all the time of people's longing for diversity, but they just can't find the people. But the people exist, they're out there. Tanya, I want to turn to you.
Thank you. And I would say, Paula, I don't think anyone can be too passionate about promoting and supporting diversity. I do also feel very, very strongly about it. Obviously, in Mexico, the energy sector in Mexico is very male dominated. I used to work for the state oil company, and I have, horrible stories that I could talk about. But what do I focus on as a CEO of an organization? We have 1,500 employees. So, I focus on attracting, on attraction, retention, and promotion. So attracting, like you said, Cheryl, how can you hire a woman if you're only interviewing men? So I asked my HR team, if you're interviewing for a new position, find a woman candidate. The best person will get the job, but you need to find a woman candidate. And don't tell me there aren't any women out there. And we actually have a program to take kids right out of college, with their engineering diplomas. And we have a training program for them to be operator at our plants. And when we do that, it's always split 50% women, 50% guys. So right from the start, you're attracting women to the company. Retention, I think most women leave their jobs when they have children because they have to take care of their baby. So when I became CEO of Yanola, the first change I made in the organization was to extend maternity leave and extend paternity leave so that women, when they were ready, could come back to their jobs. It's very simple, but it's critical. And finally, promoting women. How do you promote women? By making them visible, by having them speak up in meetings, by making them apply for that job where they think they're not qualified. I form part of a group that's called Voz Experta, Expert Voices. It's a group of 130 women that have more than 10 years of experience in the energy sector. And the only thing that we do is promote women participation in energy industry conferences, because so often we hear that there are no women experts. So going back to Paula's and Sophie's comments, we need to make women visible. That's how they become leaders. If you cannot see them, you cannot be them. And it's amazing how every time I speak at a conference, you usually step down from the forum and there's always a group of younger women that come up to you and say, that was very inspiring. It's not necessarily what you said, but just seeing you up there and imagining that they can make it.
Well, I think that's a great point. And I always say, if you want more diversity of any type, put people in jobs. That says more than all the seminars and affinity groups. They're all good. Those are all good things to do. But actually, who you actually choose to hire and then promote, it says the most, more than your statement on the website and whatever. Well, we're just about out of time. I wanted to give any of our speakers a chance for a minute of last thoughts on what we forgot to ask about, or what you're taking away as you look in the future. I know, Paula, you probably have to go, so I'll excuse you, but I want to give Tanya and Sophie just a minute more, and then I'll close the session. Yeah.
I would say that when we will have better diversity at the heads of the energy ecosystems organization, be it political, be it legal, be it regulatory, be it business, when we will have more diversity, we will take better decisions that will be aiming at the better good of the people we serve and not only at our bottom line. And those decisions will be more sustainable and it will be easier to move toward this transition that we need. It was a privilege to get to know me, to know you, Cheryl. I'm sorry for my bad English. Same Paula, same Tanya. I wish you best. Stay safe, and I look forward to be with you all around a coffee table.
I agree. And I think your English is much better than if we were using my French, in spite of my name. Tanya?
Thank you, Cheryl. I was thinking about, what challenges and opportunities lie ahead. And I tend to be an optimistic. And I think if you're in the energy business, you're always thinking long-term, and you always think that there's some bright light at the end of the tunnel. And I think today we have a challenge that becomes an opportunity, which is economic recovery post-pandemic. I think we'll see a huge economic boom. And obviously, a lot of it will be supported by the US and other countries' economic recovery plan, but that needs to be a green recovery. So we're going to see, 2020 was a year of underinvestment, of very little economic growth. So I think we're going to see the world economy growing very, very quickly. And this is the opportunity to make this a green recovery. It was incredible to hear all of you, to be able to join an international panel, Canada, US, and Mexico, and of course, Cheryl. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And I think that's a great note to end on as we look to what the recovery that we hope is ahead. And it's been wonderful to be with you. I want to thank all of you, Tanya, Sophie, and Paula, for your comments, which I will think about and remember. I want to thank the people in the audience for taking the time out of their day to be part of this. And the summit, it resumes again tomorrow at 11 o'clock, and I know there's a list on the chat and at the Columbia Center on Global Energy Policy website of all our upcoming events. Thank you so much.